Good. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Like I said, they're giving free beers in a little bit, so just thanks for turning up. So my name is William Lamb. I work for VMware. I run a blog called Virtually Ghetto, and today I'll be talking a little bit about some tips and tricks, some not supported tips and tricks for evaluating vSphere 5.5, and I'll be talking about some new interesting features, and I'll have a vBrownbag exclusive for you guys at the very end that you guys will not want to miss. So disclaimer, just like our VMware presentations, this is not supported. I think you guys already know that. But what I want to highlight, please don't call VMware support on anything that I present on today. I really appreciate it. All right, so for the agenda, we're going to take a look at sort of what's the best way to evaluate and test the latest release of vSphere 5.5. We'll take a look at some of the new storage features such as vFlash read cache and Virtual SAN. I'll take a look at how you can access a VM console from any device. We'll also be looking at creating a realistic lab in your test environment before you put vSphere 5.5 into your production environment. Then we'll look at something really special for you guys, and then Q&A at the very end. So as you guys know, we just released vSphere 5.5. Just show of hands, or yell it out, what's the best way to test this, these softwares in your lab? Near and dear to my heart. Nested virtualization, right? So this is like a freebie for you guys. So tip number 0, running a nested ESXi. This is really a great way to functionally test and learn about vSphere 5.5. Prior to joining VMware, I was the vSphere administrator. And as we have new releases from VMware, I would actually put this in our lab, run in a nested ESXi configurations, and we used to do a lot of automatic deployments. And so I would do a lot of scripting, kickstart configurations, and this is really a great way to deploy the code, understand functionally how it works, develop the scripts, and once you're confident with it, you can put it into your production environment and ensure that it will work before you have to, spend hours and hours of testing on a physical piece of hardware, right? So great way to test it. ESX 5.5 can be nested within both ESX 5.0 and 5.1. So you do not need to be running the latest version of vSphere to be able to run 5.5. One thing I do want to point out here is that we do have a new requirement for memory. It used to be 2 gigabytes. It is 4 gigabytes now, so when you're upgrading your labs, you won't be able to do an upgrade immediately, so make sure you change your memory for your nested ESXi VMs. So the other thing I also want to mention, Nested ESXi has support for running the VMXNet 3 driver. This was actually introduced in vSphere 5.1. And the implementation for this is really to support something called the native device drivers. This is a new architecture that we've introduced within 5.1, primarily for our partners, so that we have native drivers within ESXi. So these are native VM kernel drivers. And a implementation that engineering built was this VMXNet 3 VM kernel driver to provide to our partners so that they have an idea of how to build this native driver. And this actually allows you to run Nested ESXi using this particular driver. Now, in 5.5, it's actually much improved in terms of some performance. And if you want to do some functional testing to see what a NIC would look like with 10 gigabit, this actually shows up at 10 gigabit. So if you need any type of functional testing, this will show it up. So this is a nice little trick just to let you guys know you can add that in and it'll actually work. So you guys have probably heard about some of the new storage features. vSphere Flash Read Cache, right? It's a new feature within vSphere 5.5, and it requires the use of SSDs. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't have spare SSDs lying around. So when we talked about using nested ESXi, how do we start doing some testing with SSDs within a nested environment? So we had the ability to actually create claim rules using ESXCLI in the vSphere 5.x release. And I don't know about you guys, but I just don't remember the syntax. It's very complex, convoluted, and it's really specific to ESXi. One of the things that was available in 5.0 that I actually recently found out was we have the ability to emulate a virtual SSD. It requires virtual hardware 8 or greater, and you add this advanced setting on the screen. So there's a SCSI bus ID virtual SSD, and you set it either 1 or 0. And this will turn your nested ESXi VM to actually plumb up and show you a SSD device. And this will allow you to test the new features of vFlash read cache. The other piece that's also very interesting too is in this particular feature set, there's automatic physical SSD detection. And what I mean by that is that if you have an actual SSD device and you provision a virtual machine and you place a VMDK on this SSD device, it will actually automatically plumb up the property to say that, hey, this VMDK is an SSD. Now, I've been asked, well, I want to go back the reverse. I have an SSD. I want to actually turn it into like a local drive. So you can actually use the same exact parameter and set it to 0. And so the underlying disk will be an SSD, and you can change that bit to show 0. So this is a really cool way if you want to do like VSAN testing on all flash. And this is a nice little trick if you want to do that for home lab testing, right? And I linked to a blog article that has all the details if you're interested in it. But this is a really neat feature, and this is actually what I use to learn about vFlash and also vSAN. So here's a quick screenshot in the vSphere web client. If you look at the disk, you'll see that there's a VMware identifier, and on the right-hand side, we have the device type, and you can see that it's actually showing SSD as the property type. Another neat little trick right here is the ability to change the VMDK so that it's no longer showing this mpx.vmhba. It's kind of annoying. Also, if you're doing scripting on actual device lens, right, we normally will expose this NNA identifier. So if you want to kind of see functionally what that looks like, you can actually enable this property called disk.enable.uuid on the VM advanced settings. And when you go through your nested VMs and it's hard disk, it's actually going to be using the NNA identifiers and stuff. So it's a neat little trick I found use for it from a scripting perspective and be able to see what the APIs would generate versus this generic MPX, which is not what you would normally see on your physical hardware and stuff. So nice little trick that I'd be aware of. All right, Virtual SAN. Anybody here heard about Virtual SAN? Excited about it? Want to test it and everything? So when this came out before we released it, I put this in my lab and I have SSDs, right? And again, emulating Virtual SSD allowed me to test this functionality. But one of the things I found was that creating this nested VM that supported ESXi, it's kind of complex. You got to set the memory, the correct CPU. You got to enable VHV, which is the virtual hardware virtualization bits. Add the parameters for SSD. It's a lot of work, and I was like, I'm going to be doing this more and more often. Like, isn't there a better way of doing this? So what I ended up thinking about this was I created an OVF template that had all these pre-configurations with all the disk, and you can extend the disk size, right? So I just made it very tiny. It's thin provision, so it's less than 1K, and I thought this might be useful to share with the community. So you can just download this, deploy 3 of them, install ESXi, and you can set up vSAN immediately and start functionally testing it. So that's exactly what I did with this one. I created a OVF that set ESX5.x, set it to virtual hardware 9, so you can actually run this in your vSphere 5.0 or 5.1 environment. I enabled the VHV virtualization hardware-assisted bit, so you don't have to check it in the vSphere web client. It's configured with 2 vCPUs, 4 gigabytes of memory, and I have one hard disk that's 2 gigabytes just to install ESXi. I have another disk that is emulating an SSD property, so that's 4 gigabytes. And then I have an additional HDD, which is 8 gigabytes. And again, this is all thin provision, so you can go in there and extend it if you want it to be a little bit bigger or add more disks to replicate a physical host that you might be thinking or considering for a vSAN implementation. And you just import this using the vSphere web client. And this is a key feature. If you don't import it using the vSphere web client, what's going to happen is that the enable VHV property is actually not going to get enabled because that's a functionality of the UI. So if you enable the C# client, you have to go in and check that box yourself. So recommendation is import using the vSphere web client. And very easy, import and go. And again, I have a blog article that has all the details, and you can actually find the download link there. So I think this is really useful for home labs to quickly just get set up and functionally learn about vSAN before you actually put it into a production environment or testing lab environment. All right, so access to VM console. I'm a big Mac user. Any Mac users here? All right, we have a few. I'm not a big fan of Windows, as you guys probably might have heard. And I like to be able to access my VMs from any device, not just from my Mac, maybe from my iPhone, iPad, right? So today, for a VM console perspective, we're really limited to just Windows and Linux using VMware's VFRC protocol to display the console. There's no Mac OS X support, and the really nice thing about vSphere 5.5, which I'm really excited about, is that we've introduced Mac OS X support. So this is not just a VM console to be able to view the console, but we have full support, meaning we can actually upload an OVF, we can mount an ISO, right? So as part of the client integration package, we have all that functionality. So I'm really excited about it. And I know there's a few other guys out here that are super excited as well. And then for the Mac OS X console specifically, it uses a new HTML5 VM console. So I don't know if you guys are aware of that. So if you're on a Windows or Linux system, by default, the platform will automatically initiate a VMRC connection. So you'll be using the legacy, or what I call the legacy VM console. And if you're on a Mac OS X system, it will actually deploy out the new HTML5 console. So knowing a little bit of that information, it got me thinking about some things. And here's the UI for what that looks like. And you'll know if you're using a VMRC interface or the HTML5 by looking at the URL, and you'll see console as part of the VM path. So I thought about this. It's kind of unfair, right? the Mac guys get something really, really cool. HTML5 browser, no flex, none of that stuff at all. I kind of want to share that with everybody else. So I looked at the URL and I kind of thought about like, what can I do to help you guys out? So it turns out I can actually get this running on an iPad, an iPhone, and even an Android device. So because it's HTML5, any browser that's HTML5 compatible, you can actually read it in the console. So what I ended up doing was I reverse engineered the URL path and using some APIs, and I basically wrote a script. And this could actually be implemented using a VCO script or even a PowerCLI script. And it's actually not that difficult to do. And what this allows you to do is create a one-time pre-authenticated session to a VM console. And I think this is actually really, really important. If you're building like a custom portal for your end users and you don't want to give them access to your vSphere client, you don't want to train them up, and they really just need console access and they have authorization to their VM, this is a great way to just send them a URL link, have at it, right? And if they close it, the session's gone. So this is really great for any kind of custom portal that you want to generate the links for them, one-time support links from a GSS or support perspective, or if you just want to be able to access your VM consoles from any device. Neat little trick. So I'll kind of go through this URL. It's a little bit complex. You don't have to, dig too deep into it. I have a blog article that goes into details. But if we took a look at the URL, the first part of it is sort of this orange-looking color. That's the host name of the vCenter server. This is the port. The port's actually configurable. By default, on the vCenter appliance, it'll be 7331. It can be configurable, and it's actually automatically will choose a free port. So if you happen to be using this, if you're using vSphere 5.5 for a Windows system, and you happen to be using that port, the platform will dynamically pick a port. So it is kind of random. But out of the box, you can be guaranteed that's going to be that port. The light blue color indicates the MoRef ID. So this is sort of the internal ID of the virtual machine. The light purple color designates the VM name. The darker green color designates the Virtual Center FQDN. This could technically be different than the host name. It's an advanced property that you can change, and so that you need to specify that. And then this next long string, this light green, is actually a session ticket. So this is what allows you to create that one-time session ticket. So if you were to create an automated portal system, you kind of have a daemon that would run, and a user would request a console to a VM. This daemon would then issue an API called a vCenter and say, give me a one-time session ticket so that I can authorize this VM console. So once you aggregate this URL together, the session's already pre-authenticated. This was something that you could not do before. So I found this to be really, really useful. And then the last parameter is just the SHA-1 SSL thumbprint of your vCenter server. So adding all this together will generate the nice little URL that you saw before. And I think this is a really neat feature, both for home labs as well for actual use cases. And I talked to a lot of customers, and I think this will be really useful for any kind of custom portal creations for their end users and all that. So neat little trick, and again, this is not officially supported. It's only supported through the Mac OS console, but you can see that by reverse engineering it, it's just a generic HTML5 browser, but definitely something useful. If you guys think it's useful, do let your technical account managers, VMware, know that this is a useful feature to have, and maybe we can make this a lot simpler in the future. And let me know if you guys have any questions. So the next part I kind of want to talk about was around creating a realistic lab environment. It's great that we can deploy nested environments and be able to test one or two hosts, but when you're writing scripts for your own production environments, usually you're going to have complex configurations, a lot of VMs, and it's just really hard to do that, especially with limited hardware and the budget, right? I don't have an infinite hardware. I don't have a big data center at home. I just have Mac Mini, and it only takes 8 gigs of memory, right? So wouldn't it be nice to be able to build up an environment that's realistic to your production environments, or something that you really want to test out from an inventory perspective, right? So if you're creating like a vSphere web client plugin and you want to test out, what is that going to look like with all these different inventory objects, it'd be nice to be able to create that and test it. So something that I wrote about and shared in the vSphere 5.1 release is something called VCSIM, vCenter Simulator. And this was available in vSphere 5.1 as part of VCSA, so this is only within the vCenter appliance. So this is another great reason on why you should take a look at vCenter appliance and give it a shot. And it really simulates a real vCenter server. Now, other people in the community have kind of done this in the past where we persisted configuration data into the database. So you're kind of injecting fake data in, and you kind of have to make some of that stuff up. What VCSIM is something that's developed by VMware Engineering for some of the QA testing internal. And when you enable this functionality in the simulator, when you create a new VM object, you're not inserting something in the database. You're going through the actual vCenter code. So you will get an actual task object. You'll get a unique MoRef identifier that's being generated by the platform. It acts and simulates just like a real virtual machine. You can perform actions on it, so you can power it off, you can power it on, you get the right task, you'll see the right UI. So this literally is going through the actual vCenter code. We're not faking this stuff where other people were like, I'll just inject some data in the database, and then it artificially shows up, but when I try to delete it, platform crashes, right? So this is a really neat feature, and again, this was really developed internally for engineering, but I thought that this would actually be really useful for a couple of use cases. The first one is around learning about the vSphere APIs, right? You can set this up. You don't need any host. It will generate the right properties for you, and you can start using like the vSphere mob. You can use Power CLI. You can use VCO. Learn about the APIs. You know, if there's new APIs that came out with 5.5, you don't want to spend time setting up your home lab. You can just set this up, turn this property on, and automatically you have a vSphere environment that you can start kind of poking at it. Of course, it's very limited in terms of its capabilities, so you're not going to be able to do everything, but it's very useful for these use cases that I've listed out. The second one is around developing and creating various inventory script, right? You know, first thing that a lot of people start with, like Power CLI, is just reporting. I want to create a report on all the VMs that have a snapshot. Why should you have to create real VMs, create snapshots? You can actually use this and start simulating the environment, and then this allows you to create some scripts and pull that information. So really useful for reporting. The other one is around developing performance metrics. There's actually a lot of parameters in vCenter Simulator that I'm just going to gloss over, but I have an extensive blog article that goes through it. You can actually query a bunch of performance stats. You can actually artificially set latencies in some of these statistics. And so if you have some issues that you're trying to troubleshoot in your environment, you can actually create some of that. You know, it's not going to be 100%, but you can create some of that in your environment, go through your scripts and kind of run through that and kind of see what's that's going to look like before you actually apply it to your production environment. So there's a lot of very nice performance customization as part of vCenter Simulator that's really useful as well. And then the last one, like I mentioned earlier, is around developing a vSphere Web Client plugin. This might be more useful for like some of our partners. You know, you want to create 10,000 VMs. I don't know if you guys notice here, but you know, in this inventory, I have 10,000 VM objects and 480 hosts. So you can hit the configuration maximums if you want to, right? And so it's really great to be able to see that and then create the plugins and kind of see what that looks like. And in the 5.1 release of vCenter Simulator, sort of the first release of it, it was kind of hokey. And what I mean by that is that you got to edit the VPXD configuration. It's this XML. It's really ugly. It's not very easy to use, and easily there can be some typos, right? So this is tip number 4, but really what's really cool that I wanted to share with you guys here is that for 5.5, we actually have a new release of VCSIM. I'm just dubbing it 2.0. None of this stuff is even official. I'm just giving it build numbers. But there's a lot of new features that's inherited in here, and these are just really high-level points. I have a blog article that goes into way more detail. So some of the new support that we've added here is being able to manage the VDS. So you now have full CRUD operations. You can create, you can delete it, you can update it, you can change the DB port groups on a virtual machine. We also have VCNS support, so now you can actually create an edge gateway device, so you don't even need an actual edge gateway device. It'll create it and simulate some of those operations. You can create org VDC networks, so this is really useful for any, if you guys do anything with vCloud Director, and if you want to learn about the APIs, this is a great way to learn it. We now have the ability to persist the inventory, so if you come up with this particular configuration, you say, you know, this is my dev environment, I want it to always look like this. In the past, once you restart that appliance, it's gone. You got to recreate it. We now allow you to save it, and you can actually store these in different configuration files. You can share it, right? So if you come up with this really interesting environment and you're like, I'm hitting this particular bug, you can give this to VMware, you can give it to somebody else and say, here it is, load it in, go through your testing and all that. So I think that's a really cool use case for it. And then the other one is really, you can start doing custom configurations. So what the developers did in this release was to start to isolate each of the builds of ESX. So before it was just one version of ESXi, I think it was like 4.0. Now it's actually broken up to directories. So you can have a directory for 5.5, for 5.1, so you can actually simulate different versions and mix them up. So it's really, really customizable. And I've asked the developer to kind of look into more ways, and if you guys have ideas of things that you would like to see as you guys play with this Fling, do let us know. And then the last feature that I want to talk about was that before it was really hard to set up, right? Now we've introduced some very simple CLI commands called VMware-VCSIM start and stop. And I'll go through a quick demo of what that looks like and how easy it is to really get started. So let me power on my appliance. Any questions so far? Any comments? Good so far? You guys interesting? Yeah? All right. You guys able to see that fine? Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, there's the new VCSIM start and stop command. So if I just, I guess that's not going to be too useful. Oops. I think it might be. Yeah, it's not really useful when it's a lot of text. Kind of see that. So when you run the dash help, there's sort of three options that you can start the simulator. The first one is sort of an empty configuration. So if you want nothing and you want to use scripts to build up your inventory, or you want to take a look at what's there, which is really just nothing. It just gets you a basic vCenter server up and running with no inventory. Then you run the VMware-VCSIM start and you specify the word empty, and that will just give you nothing. And you can kind of use PowerCLI, VCO, whatever scripts you want to build up that inventory. So that's one way of doing it. Second one is something called defaults, and they're under the path, under ETSI VMware VPX, there's a vCSIM-default configuration file, and it's fully documented, and this has a very generic configuration. You know, some amount of hosts, some amount of resource pool, some amount of VMs that's powered on, and if you just specify the default flag, it automatically generates the inventory for you without you having to think about it. And then the last one, you can specify a configuration file, and you can also specify it on the command line. So if you need to do something really quickly, you can say, start VCSIM, I want 2 clusters, and I want 5 VMs. You don't even need to create a file, and you hit go. So we'll go ahead and show what the default looks like. So we'll go ahead and enter the command. And the way you set this up is actually really easy. You set up the VCSA just like you would if you were to deploy it in production. You set it up, go through the normal wizard, but instead of adding anything to the host, you then come into the SSH session, and then this is where you start dealing with the commands. So here I've already pre-set up my VCSA, and I'm going to go through and run the configurations, and then we'll take a look at the environments once it's loaded back up. So. And there's a lot of different example configuration files, so there's different inventory lookups, and there's a lot of documentation, and I've also blogged about this as well, so all the links will be available on the presentation as well afterwards. So here we're finishing up reinitializing, so we basically stopped the vCenter server, loaded the configuration, and what this script is really just a wrapper, taking those configurations, and it's actually injecting into the VPXD file, so it's backing it up, injecting the new configuration files, and then restarting again, and then when you disable it, it'll undo all the configuration changes. So it's very customizable and modular, and you can easily transport it. So here we're just waiting for VPXD to come back online, and then we should be able to log into this environment and see some VMs. So any of you guys think this might be useful in your environment? Interesting, yeah. Okay. So now I have an inventory. I have my vCenter server. You know, so the default profile has the data center, and these are all pre-configured with the name, so you can change them afterwards. One of the feature requests I've asked of the engineer is to be able to allow me to not only specify what the inventory is going to look like, but also specify the name. So you can actually set your particular host names. So this might be good for demos. Right, you don't even need a real environment. I just don't tell your customers or your clients that, but it's a really great way of doing that. And here you can see I have 64 virtual machines. Some of them are powered off. So let's come in here and power one of these guys off. See, we have a task kicked off, right? So it acts and feels just like a vCenter server. And again, it's not implementing every single functionality, but reporting definitely, and all the inventory structures will be available to you. So again, it's a really great tool for scripting, learning about the APIs, and I highly recommend new users or even advanced users to take a look at it and see how that might fit in your home lab. And it's a great way to get familiar with the vSphere platform and then also get used to the vCenter appliance, which I really, really love. Okay, so that's that. And then there's some links. You can also do vCloud Director Simulator too. So there's some advanced properties that you can set within the vCloud Director database, and it basically hooks onto vCenter Simulator. And then you can basically simulate all the vCloud Director constructs like org VDC, provider VDCs, add hosts, remove hosts, put them in maintenance mode. So you can see the possibilities are really endless, right? And it's really to your imagination of what you think this might be given to you in your own environment and the use cases that you might be solving with it. Okay. Okay, so that's the end of my presentations. Any questions? Seems like you guys are waiting for something. Hold on. Yes, they work on all things. Yeah. I thought you guys would have caught it. Didn't you guys see it? So I told you guys that I would have a very exclusive vBrownbag for VMworld. I showed it to you guys. You didn't see it? No? All right, time for a demo. Let's exit out of here. So what I'm doing here is just resuming a regular Nested ESXi. It's a 5.5 VM running on Fusion. Nothing special. No configuration, nothing, right? So this is standard, no trickery, right? So SSH's this real quick. You guys see something interesting there? Oops. Are you guys interested in that? Yeah? Yeah? You guys gotta be more excited than that, right? I thought you guys might like that. All right, so this is something that we've been asking for, and I know that we've heard a lot from you guys, and I've been pushing very, very hard within internally. And you don't even, if you guys really think this is really useful, we'll be putting this as a fling. But I do want to, throw a quick shout out to one of our engineers, Jim Matson. He's one of the guys that's actually been working on nested virtualization for multiple times. And you might have seen his name. I blogged about it. And it's something I reached out to him and say, hey, you know what? This is really useful. I find there's a lot of use cases for VMware internally for having this functionality, right? And so I said, hey, we've heard from the customers, from you guys. And so I said, let's put something together. And so what we have here is VMware tools for Nested ESXi, installable as a VIB. And I'll show you how that works, and it's actually very simple. So to install this, we'll be using ESXi, specifying the -v flag, and then you'll need to give the full path of the VIB tool, and then you need to specify the -f option to install. Actually, I may need to put it into maintenance mode, maybe. Yeah. Oh, okay. So after it's installed, that's it. One-liner to install it, and then all we do is do a reboot, and VMware tools will be running on Nested ESXi. We have a VMware tools daemon that's been purpose-built for Nested ESXi, and I think there's a lot of interesting use cases for it, specifically for within VMware. We build a lot of what we call vPods, so nested environments, all completely isolated. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to right-click and just say shut down versus having to power off, or you need to SSH in? It's really painful. And then if you use something like vCloud Directory, you can set all the priority shutdown, and you can just say shut down the vApp, and everything will shut down cleanly. So that is the secret surprise. So what we've introduced here is a new VIB. It will support ESXi 5.0, 5.1, and 5.5. So you don't need to be using the latest release. It will support all this release. We'll be distributing this as a VIB that you can download off of VMware's Fling website, and that's something that we're working on right now. And like I said, to install it, it's just ESXi software VIB install -v-f, and then the full path to the VIB file. And what do you get by installing this, right? So the first one, of course, is just basic power operations. I can go to the web client, I can go to C# client, I can just right-click, shut down, really nice. The other piece of it is I also have the ability to expose the vSphere guest operations API. So now I can actually do some very interesting automation in my nested ESXi environment. If I want to pull files out from a troubleshooting perspective, from logs, if I want to execute a command that has no APIs, I now have an interface, right? So guest operation API was formerly known as the VIX API. And what it does, it allows you to perform operations within the guest OS as if you were basically logged into it. So there's an interface that's provided through VMware tools. So that's why having tools in Nested ESXi is actually really interesting and important. And by using this implementation, I can go in and I can run any arbitrary command within the ESXi shell as you would if you didn't have APIs or CLIs automated. Now again, this is only for Nested ESXi only, but it opens up a variety of use cases, and I'm sure you guys will find some interesting things with it. A couple of things that you can't do with it, or some assumptions that have been asked already internally, is that if you install this VIB, say on 5.1, one of the things that you can do from a UI perspective is I can right-click on and say, upgrade VMware tools. You will not be able to do this. Again, and this is a custom VIB that we built. It's not something that's being distributed with our actual ISO release. So you're not going to be able to right-click, and you'll probably just get an error. So I just want to let you guys know you won't be able to do that. And again, it's not bundled in. So if you wanted to sort of have this as part of your image, you can use Image Builder for Power CLI to integrate this into your ESXi ISO. So if you want to do nested deployments, you can integrate it in so you don't have to install this VIB each time. Or you can also automate using a Kickstart script. So that's another way of implementing it. So it's really useful. And we're working on it right now to get this as a fling. So we heard you, push for you guys, and this is what it brings. So hopefully it was enough to hold off on beer for a little bit longer. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions, comments, if you guys really like this fling, enjoyed it, it's a lot of hard work from our engineers, do leave a comment. You guys enjoyed or some of the use cases. Our engineers really do appreciate that. So yeah, so once that's out, I'll let you guys know. So thank you for attending. I don't know if you guys have any questions or no questions.